So animals obviously and plants use uh, energy for growth and reproduction. So when we talk about growth, we could talk about going from, in most cases, a single cell into a multicellular organism. So in plants, we have the seed that can develop into a whole new plant. Even in us, we start off as a single cell that then develops into an embryo, then develops into a fetus. And there's a huge amount of energy that is required for that development. When we talk about growth, we can talk about those organisms that have metamorphosis. And this means that they have more than one body form. So for example, in some aquatic like sponges or some aquatic like even corals, the larvae are able to swim around, but then they settle down and then they become the adult, which is not able to move into a new environment. When we talk about metamorphosis in insects, we have some dramatic changes. So for example, we can talk about the dragonfly larvae, which is actually aquatic, and it can live in streams, it can live in ponds, and it is carnivorous, and it is actually known to be extremely kind of predaceous. It has this jaw that is able to come out and grab onto the prey and pull it back in. The adult then metamorphoses, and so it goes completely different form. It becomes terrestrial and even aerial because it develops wings. And so we have the adult dragonfly, which is terrestrial. Now, the aquatic dragonfly might live few years in a pond, and then the adult dragonfly only lives one season, but it is also carnivorous, but it is catching things on the fly. So you see them flying around the ponds, and then they reach out and grab something, and that is them eating, right? And so this metamorphosis is kind of interesting because it allows these organisms to live in different environments and to utilize different resources so they're not competing with access to one another. Okay. We can also talk about reproductive strategies. So reproductive strategies. Sometimes organisms migrate in order to reproduce. So we can talk about migration. So they might overwinter in warm climates. And if we're talking about birds, they might come back up and actually breed in an entirely different environment. And this has to do with the amount of energy that is available in those two environments. And so there's a really interesting analysis of this energy. So let me get that analysis up. And it is in shorebirds. And they're able to tell where they are using energy by looking at the presence of the different carbon isotopes. And in this case, it's carbon 13 versus carbon 12. And so what we see here is we're looking at carbon, and we see that the flight feathers is powered by carbon that is obtained in warm environments where the birds are overwintering. And then when they go up to, say, for example, the Arctic, we see that this is a different type of carbon, maybe carbon 12. And so it's the ratio between 13 and 12. And so this means that they're using the energy that they obtain while they're up in the Arctic to actually produce the eggs. And then obviously the newborns would also be using that energy that is obtained from that environment. So migration is actually, in this case, a reproductive strategy. It's important to realize that reproduction does not just involve the production of offspring, but it could also involve subsequent care of the offspring. So how long are you going to take care of your babies? So there are different strategies for this. And so we can talk about those organisms that are selected. This is a strategy where you produce many offspring, many more offspring that could possibly survive. And this generally means that there is little parental care. So if you think about frogs, for example, the eggs are laid, the sperm are dumped on top, and then the frogs go away, right? They produce a lot of eggs. It's R selected. So only a few of those offspring are probably going to survive to become adults and to also reproduce. This is just a strategy, R selection. We could also talk about those that are K selected, and these produce few offspring. And they need to care for these offspring. So they have lots of parental care. So a lot of mammals have K selection because they are utilizing milk they're providing milk to the offspring for long periods of time. And they're not producing a lot of offspring all at once. Another example we talked about was in sharks, how sharks, for example, in many cases, are very K selected. They don't produce a lot of offspring like other bony fish, in that they might just produce 2 pups a year, if that, and it takes them a long time to get to reproductive age. And so K selected. So knowing when you're looking at the conservation of a species, whether it's R selected or K selected, is super important. And again, there's no right or wrong strategy. It's just different strategies for utilizing and allocating resources. And these strategies are driven by natural selection. So this is which organisms are able to survive and to reproduce again, to pass their genes on to the next generation. So these are adaptations that allow organisms to survive and to also reproduce.